Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to assemble the FPV canopy that comes with the DuraFly Tundra V2. Right now it doesn't really look like much, but after we splash some glue around it's going to work a treat. If you look at the instructions, all we get is a basic 3D render exploded diagram. And for the most part it's easy enough to identify the parts. Most of the time they really only fit in one place. Before we start putting it together though, we need to trim off all the little bits of wood that connect the parts and give the sides a very light run on a sanding block so they're nice and even. With a sharp knife you can just press down and the bits will ping off, leaving very little behind. Now for the fun part, I've laid out the parts roughly in the right positions. The good bit is, because it's been laser cut with some rather good accuracy, the parts will press together and the tabs will keep it fairly stable so you can do a dry build. That means we can test fit everything before we add any glue. What I'll do is time-lapse the assembly until I get to a sticking point. You can see all the parts fit great. All the major parts slot together perfectly, making for a very solid structure. Quite impressive and better than some fairly expensive laser cut balsa ply model kits that I've put together. Before the rear panel goes on, we need to glue on the backing plate for the magnet. It's just a case of using some medium cyanoacrylate to stick it in place. Be warned though, I didn't quite get it in the right spot. I had it too far towards the back edge, which causes problems in the next step. After I let it dry and refitted it to the dry build, I found the rear panel wouldn't fit. Because the bit we glued on is too far back, it gets in the way. A bit of a pain, but it was easy enough to fix with a Dremel and a sanding drum just to take 1mm off the magnet backing plate. After some subtle adjustments, the panel slots in and that's the FPV canopy dry assembled. To go with it is the front tongue that latches into the front of the fuselage. It's just two spacers and the tongue itself that gets glued together in a stack. Now before we add any glue, I'm going to give all the joints a few taps just to make sure they're fully home. You don't need to be heavy-handed, just enough to make sure everything's nicely seated. Then to make the structure solid, I'm going to use a few dabs of medium cyano over the joints. Just a spot or two on each one for the time being so we can handle it without distorting the shape. In one of the bags that came with the model, we have the magnet that needs to get glued into the top. It's really important that you get the magnet the right way up, so triple check it by popping it onto the fuselage. Even better, right on the top of the magnet, which side faces upwards. Now we can add a couple of spots of medium cyano into the hole and drop in the magnet. Now ideally you don't want to get any glue on the outward surface, but if you do, wipe off the excess quickly before it dries. Next, square with the front edge and perfectly between the markings on the bottom, we can glue on the tongue with some more medium cyano. Now I did double check the fit on the fuselage before gluing, just in case, but it's all been designed rather well and it was a perfect fit. Now we have an almost complete FPV canopy, we just need to finish gluing all the joints. For this we're going to use the dreaded thin cyanoacrylate. It's got the consistency of water, so you need to be very careful with it. We want to run it along all the joints. It's going to flow everywhere and soak into the wood, making it extremely strong. But that also means it tends to flow right to your fingers if you're not paying attention. Okay, leave the canopy to fully dry. Best bet is just to leave it overnight so you can be sure. It shouldn't take more than 30 minutes though, but if you can leave it longer, why not? For the camera system, there's a few ways we could go. The easiest setup would just be to stick one of these all-in-one camera transmitters on the top of the servo and go fly. But I'm after something a little bit more flexible. So for a first setup, I'm going to use a standalone 25mW 5.8 gig transmitter that has a 5V output to run a camera. It'll end up getting servo taped to the back with the antenna up high above the fuselage. The only wiring we need to worry about is the power to the red JST, which will just connect up to a small 2-cell LiPo, and the 3-wire connector that powers the camera and has the composite video signal. For now, I'm just going to use one of these miniature spy cameras. I've been using them on a couple of trucks for a while, and they work a treat, especially when there's lots of light. They're only PAL, so no high definition, but for now they're going to work. We could of course use the run cam. Okay, this is only the mount because I lost track of the camera itself. It only turned up a couple of weeks after I shot this clip in the glove box of my car. But a run cam or similar that can output composite and record HD would be rather good. For the servos, we're just going to use a couple of your typical 9g SG90s. They can be had for less than £2 each, and while not the best quality, they will do the job well enough. Okay, I'm going to cut to the great outdoors now, and the canopy fully kitted out. First of all, it's now white to match up with the fuselage. I just gave it a couple of quick passes with some acrylic. It's not the most even, but when it's fitted it looks like part of the model now, rather than an afterthought. The little camera is now mounted up to a pan-tilt gimbal using the two SG90s. Now I modified a mount that I found on Thingiverse that I'll put a link to in the description. It's not ideal, but it works. When I have something better, there will be an update video with lots of information. For the wiring, we have the red JST for the transmitter power, and now we have a 4-pin connector for the two servos. Now I could have just used a pair of standard servo extensions, but the single connector makes it easier to plug in without having to figure out which one plugs in where. It's just a case of plugging in the servos, and they end up on channel 7 and 8 on the receiver. For power, we plug in a small 2S battery, and for now we'll just pop it on top of the flight pack and strap it down. It's good enough for circuits and bumps, but I'll have to do something a bit sturdier before we do any real aerobatics. When it's all connected, we can pop the tongue in at the front and drop the back down so the magnets grab. And that's about it really. That's it flight ready. On the transmitter, I have one of the shoulder switches set up to lock out the pan tilt. That way, if I ever get mixed up and lose orientation, I can flip the switch and the camera will go directly front and centre. For the time being, I've just got the servo controls on the two front knobs on the radio. Obviously this isn't ideal, but we can have a quick play while flying straight and level. This whole setup is really just for testing for the time being. The plan is to end up with HD recording and head tracking for the camera. That way I can look around with the goggles on while flying. That'll be in the future though, and ultimately will carry over to the trucks so I can look around while driving on the layouts. Right then, this is the view from the camera recorded on the goggles. For the first flight, I'm going to fly a couple of normal line of sight circuits with my spotter wearing the goggles to get a feel for how solid the video signal is. Turns out it's pretty good overall. There's a couple of minor fades, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's mainly a problem when getting over the flight line, but that's to do with the antenna type, which is a little weak vertically as most of the signal is directed out sideways, so there's really nothing to worry about. I'm staying well within the field, so when I've got the goggles on, I've got a good reference for the signal. I know as long as I stay inside the hedge line, I'm good. I'll almost certainly be able to safely push it a good few metres without any problems. In fact, I could most likely get well over the next field, but without a signal strength on the 2.4 GHz RC, it wouldn't be super safe. I have audio alerts, but that's a bit all or nothing. After the short flight, I'll also give the gimbal a quick check to make sure the vibration hasn't caused any problems, just giving the wires and all the other bits a quick tug to make sure nothing's coming loose. Right, with the safety check done, we can now get on to the main event, the proper FPV flight. Now, I've currently got the goggles up on the top of my head. The plan is to take off line of sight, get a little bit of altitude, then pull the goggles down over my eyes. I've still got the spotter next to me, who's calling out anything he spots, as well as letting me know how high I'm flying until I get a feel for it. You'll see when I'm flying FPV that the flying style changes quite a bit. The turns become much sharper, and during the flight things improve until I was confident enough to try a bit of a barrel roll, which I have to say was a little bit disorientating. I think with the head tracking setup that would be much less of an issue. During the flight I didn't really use the gimbal all that much as it's a bit tricky to reach the knobs, but it does work with all the airflow from the prop and vibration. The video isn't wavy, so that's good enough to work with. For the landing, I took the goggles off so I could go back to line of sight. For the last leg, the receiver antennas are actually at ground level, and they still work fairly well, which is quite impressive. I still find it easier to judge altitude line of sight. Plus, in the unlikely event my spotter misses an errant civilian on the field, I can always adjust accordingly. Right then, so that's it from me this week. I'm not sure how much of the flight's left, but I'll leave it running until the end. Next week we're going to go back to the trucks, so until then, as always, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!